Man, it is good to be with you, and really, really good to be back. So we'll have a video update for you in a couple of weeks that give you a little more information and detail on our trip. But we spent 8 days, Gary Foran and I, in Uzbekistan over the last couple of weeks, got back late Thursday night, and we had a really, really, really great trip. Again, more details. We told you a little about that as we rolled out kind of the Kingdom Come initiative and some of what may be an opportunity there. We get to meet with some really cool, very significant leaders there on the ground. And just found about endless opportunities and a whole lot of openness there. So more to come on all of that, but I think our excitement about potential for what could happen there in Uzbekistan is as high as it's ever been. And again, just wanted to tell you thank you for those of you that prayed for us while we were gone. That's a big deal, and it was a great trip. So thank you for that. If you got a Bible today, meet me in Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6 is where we're going to be today. And if you're just hopping in with us, we've been talking about how easy it is for all of us, regardless of what it is that we believe about Jesus, to get so familiar with a weak version or even a dead version of Jesus that we become resistant to the real Jesus in real time. And what we've been watching over our journey is we've watched Jesus take a whole bunch of regular people that look a lot like us. Some of them who, in some cases, wanted nothing to do with him initially. To others who literally grew up with Jesus, and how he took all of those people and he transformed them slowly but surely over time into people who were virtually unrecognizable even to themselves in all of the best ways. And today what we're going to see is a story that's pretty familiar, I think, to a lot of us. Even if you're not a Bible person or a Jesus person or a church person, the chances are you've heard some version of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And yet, as we've said about familiarity, if you know nothing about this story, you may be in an even better position to understand it than some of us who have grown up hearing the story all along. We're going to be in Mark chapter 6 and look at it together. So in 1939, George Dantzig walked in 20 minutes late to math class at Cal Berkeley. He'd stayed up too late the night before studying, something I never experienced as a college student. But because he was 20 minutes late to class, he didn't understand the context of the two math problems that were there on the board. He just assumed they were a homework assignment, and so during the lecture, he copied them down. Then he went home, and he solved them, even though they seemed a little harder than usual. He turned them in a couple of days later. And early in the morning after he turned in the solution to these math problems, he got a call from his professor wanting to meet as soon as possible. He walked into the professor's office where he learned what he had overslept that morning. The professor had written those two math problems on the board as examples of problems that mathematicians all over the world, including a guy that maybe you've heard of named Albert Einstein, considered unsolvable, impossible math problems. But Dantzig didn't know that they were impossible, so he solved them, both. I wonder if you've ever found yourself in front of an impossible problem. Not just in math class. That's a pretty low bar for me to find an unsolvable math problem. But I'm talking about life, where you find yourself faced with a problem or a challenge or an opportunity or a need that in some ways feels like it's up to you, but for which you most certainly know you're not up for it. For some of us, a moment like that might have pulled away from the hospital with our first baby in the car. You remember that moment? Some of you that have had that experience, I remember distinctly loading Kaysen into the car, getting ready to bring him home, thinking, wait, they're going to let us take him home by ourselves. And the only thing that we've got to prove that we know how to do is install a car seat? I don't think we're up for this, and I wonder if they know. For some of you, maybe that moment was being put in charge of something for the very first time, a team or a project where people were actually depending on you and assumed that you know what you're doing, and you definitely did not know what you were doing. Or maybe it wasn't a moment that you chose at all. You found yourself in front of a moment that chose you, and it was impossible. It was unsolvable. A situation in your family, a diagnosis from a doctor, a relationship that started falling apart. And suddenly you were in the middle of it. and you were certain that you weren't up for it. Life moments like that, I think, come for all of us. But the truth is that the more you follow Jesus, if you follow him long enough, you begin to run into moments where you can't shake the idea that he put you into those moments. And he did it on purpose. You find yourself in front of a neighbor you've only ever waved at from a distance. But at some point in the conversation, it becomes clear that I've been telling you the truth all these years. God places people in places on purpose. And one day in front of a neighbor, it becomes crystal clear why he placed a person like you next to them. And yet in that moment, you don't feel like you're up to a moment like that. Your mouth gets dry, your palms get sweaty, you're not even sure you can remember your own name. And you're it, but you're pretty sure you're not up to it. When you find yourself placed in a moment where what's required of you is bigger than you, what do you do? Well, that's exactly what these followers of Jesus find themselves needing to know in the story that we're looking at today. Look with me, Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30. Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they'd done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all of the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. All right, so just a little bit of context if you're just hopping into the series. Jesus sends these guys into the deep end a couple of weeks ago, sort of like SEAL training for downproofing with no floaties. He intentionally pushes them to their limits so that they know what to do when they find themselves in really hard places and in really hard moments without what it felt like you needed for a place in a moment like that. See, the thing is, most of the time in the moments that matter, we don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. That's true in everything. And in these weeks, we're watching Jesus form these followers into people who respond to everyday moments in supernatural ways. They're learning how to live like Jesus and how to depend on him even when he's not right nearby. Remember? Well, they've been out doing that, and now they've come back to Jesus and they're debriefing their experience, and it's gone really, really well for them. In fact, they're riding back into town like former small-town high school football players ride into small towns for homecoming every year. Like they're patting each other on the back, retelling all the old stories, reminding themselves how awesome they are because how awesome they were back there. And tell all of the stories. And Jesus is like, dang, you guys must be tired from all that awesome. Let's go get some rest. So they get in a boat. Mark tells us they go to a solitary place so that they can get some rest. And yet something funny happens there in the margins if you're reading the story. If you've ever been to Israel, you know the Sea of Galilee is really more of a lake. In fact, it's only about twice the size of Possum Kingdom Lake, if you want a little size comparison. You could see the shore from wherever you are in the middle of the lake. So these guys get in a boat with Jesus to go to a solitary place away from the crowds, and the crowds are running along the shore with an eye on the boat, and they beat them to the solitary place they were going. Which if you're in these guys' shoes, just picture it. It's got to be both exhilarating and exhausting all at the same time, right? They're like Taylor Swift trying to take a vacation. Like it's nice to be awesome, to be celebrated everywhere you go. But at some point, don't you think Taylor Swift would like to just lay by a pool without sucking in fear of the person next to her having an iPhone? It's exhilarating, but it's got to be pretty exhausting. These guys have to be a little frustrated with what they see when the boat lands on the shore, but Jesus sees it differently. Look at verse 34. It says, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. So remember from last week, Jesus is in a bit of his own story too in this moment, isn't he? The other eyewitness accounts of this moment tell us the disciples weren't the only ones looking for rest. Jesus has just found out that his close cousin was brutally killed by a drunk, impulsive king. And Jesus is grieving, and he's exhausted. But you notice where his attention goes, despite all of that? Jesus sees need right in front of him. And in fact, he doesn't just see it. That word that Mark uses for compassion, it's a fun Greek word. It's the Greek word splenchnizomai. You like to try to say it? Try it, splenchnizomai. Yeah, so you got to pronounce it right, sound like you're a little bit sick to your stomach. Because that's exactly what the word means. It's used 9 times in the New Testament, and every time it's used to describe something that Jesus feels in the midst of human need. So notice that. Jesus walks into this moment. He's not put off by the crowd. He's not annoyed by the needs. Even in the middle of his own grief and his own exhaustion, Jesus feels the need he sees. Jesus feels the need he sees. And some of you need to hear that this morning. So let me just say it as clearly as I possibly can. Jesus cares about your need, whatever it is today. He cares about your hurts. He cares that life can be really hard. He cares about the fact that there are things that are going on in the world, from the things that happen in throne rooms in the political sphere to the heartbreaks and the tragedies in your own family. And he doesn't just notice it, he feels it. Because if you spend much time in his story, you notice those specific hurts have been his hurts too. And yet look back at this part of the story. These chest out disciples, they still have a whole lot of growing to do before they begin to look a whole lot like Jesus, but they're growing in the right direction. In fact, look at verse 35. It says, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So notice, these followers of Jesus, they see the need, don't they? Like Jesus is starting to rub off on them, but only a little. And yet I think it's important to point that out because this is part of the journey that we're on, isn't it? Learning to look like Jesus and love like Jesus and lead like Jesus. As people who are learning to follow Jesus and learning to look like Jesus, it's not like we magically trust him one day and then look exactly like him the next. That's not the journey. Sometimes we tell our stories that way, which isn't fair. Like the way we tell our story, before Jesus, I was a terrible human being. And then I met Jesus. Now I'm a perfect angel. That's just not the way it works. And it's probably not a true story. It's really more like a marriage, isn't it? Transforming to look like Jesus. Like there's a moment when you enter into marriage. You're pronounced husband and wife, and the relationship begins. But the more you learn to love each other, and you live alongside each other and do life with each other, slowly you begin to transform to look and behave more like each other. I literally had this moment this past week. I was riding in a van down a bumpy road in Uzbekistan, and there was a suitcase in the back of the van that was squeaking every time we hit a bump. And I had this thought as I'm listening to the squeak, and it's just grinding on me, I've got to fix that squeak or somebody in this van's going to die. And then immediately after that thought, I thought, what am I thinking? I don't care about squeaks like that. You know who cares about squeaks like that? Carrie Freeland cares about squeaks like that. And somewhere in the auditorium, she's celebrating right now. It's taken 23 years, but I'm slowly beginning to notice the things that she notices. But it's taken 23 years. Transformation doesn't happen in a moment. It happens over time, and it will for these guys, and it will for many of us. That's why we're walking slowly through the Gospel of Mark together. Jesus feels the need that he sees. These guys, they're not there yet, but they're moving in the right direction. At least they notice the need around them. And that's where at least asking for us at this point of the story, isn't it? When it comes to the crowds, when it comes to the world, where we live, do you notice the needs around you? And if you notice them, do you just notice them? Or do you feel them like Jesus does? Keep reading. The disciples feel something in their gut, but it's not compassion. They're hungry. And it causes them, because they're hungry, to realize the crowd must be hungry too. So they offer what's a pretty reasonable solution to meeting their own needs and also the needs of the crowd. You see it. They say, Jesus, send these people home. Send them to the countryside so they can buy something to eat. But Jesus has another idea. And this is the moment that everything changes in the story. Look what Jesus says, verse 37. He answered, you, give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? So think, right up to this moment, the need and the problem and the challenge seems like it's all around them and it's right there in front of them. But with one sentence, Jesus makes it clear that he thinks the problem is up to them. And they pretty quickly realize that they are not up for the thing that's up to them. In fact, they respond exactly like you and I would. They start doing the math. They start looking for their Costco card. And they come to the conclusion, Jesus, we cannot do this thing that you're asking us to do. And check it out. They're right, aren't they? But think even further. If you remember the first story in this chapter, if you were here a couple of weeks ago, they should have been prepped for this moment. He sent them out before, and he sent them out without two things at least. Do you remember what they were? He sent them out 2 by 2 without bread and without money, specifically. And yet notice what Jesus doesn't do in this moment. He says, you give them something to eat. They say, we can't do that. That's impossible for us. He doesn't say, oh yeah, gosh, my bad. Yeah, send them home. Instead of lowering the need, Jesus presses into it. He looks at these followers and says, hey, so how many loaves do you have? Not because he doesn't know, but because he wants them to know that what he's inviting them to do is impossible. The problem that's in front of them is unsolvable. And he wants them to feel it. So they go and they look. And they come back with basically a Lunchable. 5 tortillas and 2 sardines, right? So that's not enough for me to even have a snack. Forget a crowd of 5,000 men, not counting their wives and their kids. So we may be talking about 20,000 people here along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So think about what Jesus has just done for these people that are learning to follow him. With apologies to the Hallmark cards and all of the memes that promise God will never do this, he has just given them more than they can handle. And it's not the first time. And it won't be the last time. In fact, it's kind of the whole point. Because if everything in life stays within our ability and the limits of our own possibility, we will never get to see who he is very clearly. One of my very favorite classes in graduate school was with a guy who said this, and talking about this passage, this is the whole invitation of Jesus to people that follow him. You must always do what you cannot do with what you do not have for the rest of your life. This is the invitation of Jesus. You must always do what you cannot do with what you do not have for the rest of your life. And that's where these guys find themselves in this moment. And they don't know what to do with it. Look at verse 39. Impossible, unsolvable. Verse 39. Then Jesus. So don't rush past that, because this is the turning point for them. Right? They've done the math. They've reached the conclusion. We don't have what it takes to do what Jesus has invited us to do. And then Jesus steps in. Mark says, then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass, which is interesting, right? Because nothing's changed yet. They still don't have food. The math still doesn't math. The situation is still impossible. The problem is still unsolvable. But Jesus has them start organizing things like something's about to happen. So think back to those impossible examples earlier in your own life. The moments where you found yourself in a conversation that you weren't ready for. Where you sensed a nudge toward a moment that you weren't up to. Where you found yourself in an impossible circumstance that Jesus seems to have clearly led you, or at least allowed you to walk into. Notice what Jesus is inviting these guys to do right here in this verse. He's inviting them to live like impossible is possible even before there's any evidence that it is. He's inviting them to live like the impossible is possible even before there's any evidence that there is. So I have a friend that talks about leaning on closed doors. I love that image. Like when it feels like there's a door that's closed in front of you that Jesus has led you to, you don't have to kick it down. Like you don't have to pick the lock. Sometimes if you'll just lean on it, you discover that it's way more open than you thought. That's how Jesus is inviting these guys to live in this impossible moment so that he can do what he does next. But he doesn't do what I would have expected him to do or what the disciples would have done. But that's part of the point. Look at verse 41. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. So notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't get everybody's attention in the crowd. 20,000 people, eyes on me. He doesn't focus all the TV cameras and make it rain bread and fish for everybody at the same time in a big dramatic moment made for Instagram. He looks up to heaven. In the middle of an impossible moment, an unsolvable problem, he says thanks. And then he hands a little bit to each disciple. And he sends them out to distribute it. They walk out, distribute what they have, and then come back for more. And then they do it again, and again, and again. So notice in the story, where does the miracle take place? See, this is where it's dangerous to be familiar with the story. You can miss the whole point that he's trying to make to these disciples. The miracle doesn't take place in the hands of Jesus. You see this? He does his miraculous work in the empty, open hands of the disciples. And he doesn't do the whole miracle at once. Like the whole thing is him inviting these disciples to keep coming back empty-handed and to let him fill their empty, open hands up again. So can you imagine, put yourself in the shoes of those guys, what that must have felt like? Like you get a little basket that's filled with loaves and fish, and you walk out and hand it out, and you reach into the basket and there's more. You hand out what you brought to meet the need of the moment right in front of you, and then you reach in and discover there's more. At some point, through these small acts of obedience, and returning to Jesus, you begin to realize this is not coming from us. And listen, this is life following Jesus. In ordinary moments, in impossible moments. Isn't that what Mark's shown us all along? Jesus doesn't remove the need. He doesn't remove them from its presence. He doesn't take the circumstance away or take them away so they don't have to see it. Be bothered by it. He puts them in the middle of it and invites them to lean into it, and then meets them there with every step. He supplied what they didn't have for the impossible moment right in front of them, one small act of obedience after another in real time. Which means this, if you find yourself in a moment where it feels like it's all up to you, but you're not up to it, like, that's not the moment to step back. That's not the moment to throw up your hands in defeat. It's a moment to throw up your hands in gratitude that Jesus feels the need that you see. In fact, he tells us over and over, he loves to send people like you and me towards the needs that he feels so that we can show and tell who he is even while we're seeing it in real time for ourselves. Like, sometimes in dramatic ways, but not usually for these disciples, especially early on. More often, the miracles that they see and experience turn out differently than they'd have drawn it up. They show up as these disciples faced with impossible moments. They bring what little they have to Jesus and decide to step forward anyway. And he does something incremental and miraculous through them. I have several really great friends that are in recovery who have taught me so much about following Jesus. One of the things that's a mantra in the recovery community that turns out is the whole point of this story is this. They find themselves in an impossible moment where it feels like sobriety is impossible for them. They have this mantra. They say, I can't. God can. I think I'll let him. I can't. God can. I think I'll let him. That's the whole point of this story. To live our whole lives in that posture, but with a conviction that's even more specific than just God in general, right? To live towards moments in ways that say, I can't, Jesus can. I think I'll let him. And you know how the story ends. The disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of leftovers. Okay, that's not an accidental number, is it? How many of them were there? How many baskets were there? Why do all 4 Gospels tell us that? Because these eyewitnesses didn't miss the point when they wrote it down. The miracle wasn't just for the crowd. It was for them. Jesus wasn't just trying to feed hungry people that day. He was in the process of forming his followers that day to be people who would trust him enough to lean in or reach in their bag for moments where they don't have what it takes. And here's what I love about these guys as we head into the next week. Okay, they don't nail it this first time or the second time or the third time. In fact, if you keep reading Mark, and we will, they're going to show up again pretty soon, stressed out, arguing, angry, exhausted, and ready to quit because they forgot to bring bread. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know what it would look like to get this right, relax. You're in great company. Because following Jesus is not about getting it right. It's about learning over and over to bring whatever you have to the moment you're in and do whatever he tells you to do, to hear and obey with every step. So here's the question I want us to sit with this week. Is there a moment in front of you right now where it feels like it's all up to you, but you're not up to it? Something where your instinct is to step back, just throw up your hands in defeat or in anger. What would it look like for you personally in that moment to take one step forward anyway? To start organizing your life as if Jesus might be wanting to do something with your impossible, even before he does. To bring whatever you've got with open hands to Jesus. Not finding a perfect answer, not having a finished solution, just whatever you got, and to lean in with that. Because this is the life Jesus is forming in us. It's not a life where you always have enough for every moment. It's a life where you know where to go when you don't. And don't misunderstand, it's not that the promise of obedience is going to magically solve all of your impossible problems immediately, the way that you would draw a solution up. That's not the promise. Like, we're not chasing miracles. That's not the invitation here. We're following a miracle-working Jesus. That's different. If all we're in it for is to see Jesus change our immediate circumstances immediately, we're signing up for a life of frustration, because that rarely happens for these followers of Jesus. But when we're dependent on him in everything, we learn not to be surprised when we follow a miracle-working Jesus and the miracles follow us. And in fact, we learn to expect that over and over as we reach into our bag, whatever it looks like, and pull out whatever he's given us for the moment. It tends to be enough for the thing that he wants to do next. And at the end of the day, what we start to discover is that impossible moments where it feels like we're not up to it, even though it's up to us, those tend to be the moments where Jesus works the best. Remember the story at the beginning? George Danzig solved those problems because he didn't know they were impossible. He just did the thing in front of him that he knew how to do. That's the way Jesus is teaching these disciples, and through them us, to live. Not just when we don't know that something is impossible, but even in moments when we do. Because we know who we are. We know who we're with. We're learning to live out our everyday life, not in theory, but in real confidence that Jesus is telling the truth when he told us, with God, all things are possible. We can't, but Jesus can. What if we let him? Would you bow your head with me? Lord, I pray that you would bring to each of our minds, even now, something that you've put in front of us or put us in front of. And it may feel like a big thing or a small thing, but it seems like an impossible thing. Lord, will you let us be people that live with a posture that says we can't do what you've asked us to do. We don't have it in us. We don't have it with us. But Lord, we're with you. So we can't, but we believe that you can. Would you let us lean in with a posture that says, I think I'll let him, not in passivity, but to begin to organize our lives in a way that begins to expect that if you've led us to it and called us to it, Lord, that you can lead us through it. And it may not be the way that we expected or the way that we would have drawn it up. You may not do exactly what we would have done, but that you will do what's good and what's right and what's possible, even in impossible situations. And Lord, we want to be people that walk with empty, open hands, returning to you with every step, to let you use us to show who you are and tell what you're like, even as we're in the process of discovering it ourselves. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.